Well, I'll talk about a societal one and then an individual reason. And the societal one is there's been sort of the steady decline that of our ability to have conversations with each other. And frankly, it's clouded by the growth of social media where we talk in these sound bites, we argue with each other, we get into sort of a bad habit of interacting with people. We see that also on the evening news. We sort of choose the news that we like, the one that kind of agrees with us. I shouldn't say evening news, it's wherever we get our news. It could be, on the phone, it could be some video, MSNBC versus Fox. It doesn't matter what perspective you have, but we all have a perspective. And we don't always check those perspectives just at the door when we then go and interact with people. So those are some big influences going on in society.
You found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast. And now your host, Adam Sinkus.
All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is Winning Tactics Podcast Day. Excited for today's show. Before we dive into all of that, I just want to remind everybody, take a moment, swing by thewinningtactics.com, find us on YouTube or your favorite social network, drop us a like, listen to our shows, all that fun stuff. And if you love the show, don't forget to drop on over to patreon.com/Adam Sinkus, and you can support the show there as well. So, but we're talking teamwork today, right? Because teamwork is something that when it's working, it's fantastic and everybody wins, and everybody wins in big ways. But when it's broken, it's like the Titanic. And it happens very, very quickly when you get there. So excited to have you on, Barry. Barry, tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, Adam, I'm really delighted to be with you on the Winning Tactics podcast. I'm a listener, and it's a real joy. I get a lot out of the show, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. A little bit about Barry. Well, I'm a 25-year CEO. I'm still a CEO. I work for the California Municipal Utilities Association, and what that means is I work in the energy and water space in California, and we're addressing things like climate change and drought that's out here. And there's a challenge, an interesting challenge every day. It's quite engaging. And a couple of years ago, it's more than two. Within the past 10 years, I'd say, I've noticed that there has been a decline in the ability of people to just get along. And I noticed it gradually. I was in a few difficult negotiations, and it seemed like there was a pattern. So I was talking over a beer with a colleague, and it was after a particularly difficult meeting, and we said, "Does anybody get along anywhere?" And we started Googling on our phones, and we found a few examples, and thought, wow, there are some organizations and some people that are really doing cool things together. They're getting great teams together, and we just found that in a few minutes, just some case studies. And then we said, after the next beer, somebody ought to write a book. And then my friend said, "Well, why don't you write a book, Barry?" And well, there's the gauntlet's been thrown down. So I worked on it. I worked on it for several years, and then finally published a book called Connect. And what I found in the book was ways to develop teams and get to know people quickly. So it's not just about teamwork, but it's about shortcuts to teamwork and why it's important for organizations. So that's been fun. And since I wrote the book, I talk about teamwork and ways to collaborate better and faster. And it's surprisingly, people have sort of forgotten these ways, or we've sort of skidded off into some bad habits. So that's what I do now. In addition to being CEO, I guess you know, I would say a couple other very quick things going back into some ancient history. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. My wife and I served in Guatemala back in the late '80s and early '90s, and I've worked for a long time in the association world. So in a world where part of my job is bringing people together. So I've had a long history of doing that.
Fantastic. Absolutely appreciate you taking some time to share your knowledge with us this week. Um, I want to start this conversation with, I think, the most logical place, at least in my mind, to start, which is what causes dysfunction in teams, right? What are those reasons, and what are those strategies that people have in play that are actually causing dysfunction?
Well, I'll talk about a societal one and then an individual reason. And the societal one is there's been sort of the steady decline of our ability to have conversations with each other. And frankly, it's clouded by the growth of social media, where we talk in these sound bites, we argue with each other, we get into sort of a bad habit of interacting with people. We see that also on the evening news. We sort of choose the news that we like, the one that kind of agrees with us. I shouldn't say evening news, it's wherever we get our news. It could be, on the phone, it could be some video, MSNBC versus Fox. It doesn't matter what perspective you have, but we all have a perspective. And we don't always check those perspectives just at the door when we then go and interact with people. So those are some big influences going on in society. And then when it comes to individuals, we're kind of me centric. We become a bit more me centric. Just, I like to think about me. I don't like to think about you. And I'm just going to go with me first. And that is, also a trend that we've been seeing. So in order to move forward, we need to break ourselves out of that shell.
You know, I love both of those, right? And I think they're both really, really big issues in their own right. I when I lead teams, like, one of the things that I make very clear early on in that team leadership is that there's kind of the three dirty topics that we just don't talk about at work, right? And that's religion, sexuality, and politics, right? And there's a reason for that. It's not because I don't want to have engaging conversation in those spaces, but it's because there's this emotional charge that happens when you get into those spaces, right? You've got, people are very, very passionate about those three things typically. And they have a very rigid stance on it. And so, so I've always set that precedence very early on, is say this, we don't talk about this, not because I don't respect everybody's opinion on it, but because it just causes more problems than it's worth. And that speaks to that kind of societal outreach, that kind of societal overarching theme, right? But I also like that you point out that there's this me space. You're right. Because I think, especially I look back at the last year and a half here, 2 years, right? With COVID and all that going on, right? We've internalized a lot of what we do and what we think, and it's really changed the dynamic, right? You're seeing employees now holding employers much more accountable for the things that they say and promise. And I think the world speaks for itself, and the strife that we have in that space. So um how do we start to approach breaking down those barriers, right? Because that's really, I think, in my mind, at least, the first step. We have to break those barriers down before we get into all the other great stuff that we need to do to develop a team.
Excellent reflection on all that, where we are, and just recognizing the situation, which is the first step. And that is saying, things aren't quite right. They could be better. And I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe I shouldn't care why. You're smart to avoid those three topics, but nevertheless, if things don't feel right, then it's recognizing that things don't feel right. Our team isn't fully functional. We're okay. Maybe we have occasional flare ups here and there. And I sure would like things to be better, but I just don't know how. So, step one, you've hit on it perfectly, which is just recognizing that I'd like things to be better. I'm just not sure how. And, let me try to figure out some steps we can take. So, your question was, nevertheless, how do we do it? And the there's one principal way, and then there's two other really important elements. The first principal way, the overarching issue, and this is the secret divulged, and that is we need to share personal stories about ourselves, or share stories about what's going on in our lives. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. The second thing is that we need to be conscious of the amount of time that we're talking, and the amount of time that our conversation partners are talking, or our teammates are talking. And we want that to be balanced. So if you're the leader of a group of folks that is talking and we're sharing ideas, assuming that it's not one person's expertise and we're just all listening to Adam talk right now because Adam knows a lot about this issue. If we're all just brainstorming, then we want to make sure that we're all talking about the same amount of time, and somebody has to be conscientious about that. So, talking about the same amount of time. And the third thing is a general philosophy, which breaks us out of our mold. We have to assume positive intent. Assume that other people are not out to get us. And they're not. They're not out to get us. I mean, there is occasionally, a psychopath who we come across, either in the world of work or outside somewhere, who just like they're jerks, and there's nothing that we can do to establish a relationship with them. It's rare. It does happen, but it's rare. Nevertheless, the rest of us are like, you're cool, I'm cool. Let's just live our lives and figure things out. Assume positive intent. People are not out to get you. So those are the three overarching issues. I think we need to focus on the first one, which is sharing stories and how we go about doing that. And we can talk about that. Would you want to do that?
Yeah, so I want to reflect real quick, and then we'll dive into that, because I think these three pieces are really, um, they build on each other, but in their own right, both are all stand alone in providing a very key piece to the puzzle, right? So, stories to me is really interesting because we live in this society where we spend time on Zoom. We're in and out of meetings. I don't know what your calendar looks like, but like today, I had about maybe 45 minutes that I wasn't on a Zoom call. Um, and so the just how can you bring that personal perspective into that space, I think becomes really critical and important, because it humanizes um, the people that you're around, right? And that to me makes it much easier to be compassionate with those people when they feel human, and not just this robot of, oh, that's Jane, she does accounting, oh, that's Bill does communications, and it becomes, that's Jane, she has a husband, she has two kids, she loves soccer, she love, and like you can start to reflect and really just build that relationship with them, which at the end of the day, relationships in my world is like number one priority. So so let's unpack that a little bit. Talking about relationships, what are some strategies you use to build those relationships?
Well, there's 2 points I think to emphasize here. One is to be intentional about establishing relationships. So earlier we said, things aren't going great. What do we need to do? We need to improve our relationships. So let's agree that we're going, I mean, you and me here, but let's agree, in our team, we want to improve some of those relationships. And I will tell you that that is the key to improving productivity significantly in organizations. It's just setting the stage for people to get to know each other leads to significantly better productivity. It's been proven by research over and over. Nevertheless, so we've said we want to make that improvement. We want to get folks, we want to improve the team. How do we go about doing that? And we're going to talk about the techniques in just a second. So in that first step, we need to set aside a little bit of time to have some of those engagements. And there's a couple ways to do that. So if we're on Zoom, we at the beginning of a meeting, and of course it depends on how many people are in the meeting, but let's assume that it's a staff meeting or a group of folks that gets together every few weeks to talk about an issue. You want to try to spend the first couple minutes, as people are getting on the call, to catch up with people. Just check in, see how things are going. And generally there's a leader, and you want to have somebody, that leader, who is in on this, who is engaged and wants to do this, who asks, a question, and this is one example. Has anybody been streaming anything good recently? Give us one suggestion, and just 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Let's go around the boxes, the Hollywood squares, and give us one recommendation. We don't want 2 minutes or 5 minutes of an explanation here. We just want 15 seconds because we want to get through this. We want to get some great ideas. And then this is the key here. Later on, we'll catch up. Hey, Adam, you said you're watching Ted Lasso. I've heard about that. I want to catch up with you later, and you can tell me about that. And now you and I are talking about Ted Lasso later. I'm learning from you. You're telling me something that's you like in your life. You're going to tell me some lessons you've learned from Ted Lasso. I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso, but you're telling me some things about a show that you like, and we've got something in common. We're building that relationship. But still, initially, the goal is quick hits, just popcorn some ideas out, get everybody sharing. And like you said, you hear about, somebody in accounting, the accounting department, or customer service. You may not know who they are, but now you're getting a feel of what makes them tick, where their heart is at. And we can talk about a variety of potential questions to ask, but there's a lot that are appropriate for the workplace. They're light, and most folks can just share a teeny bit, and then it allows us to follow up. And again, it sets the stage for expanding teamwork and productivity later. Because when you and I have to then work on a project together, we talk to each other, or we Zoom together, or if we're in the office, we're at each other's, doors, or sitting down in a meeting, and maybe eventually we'll get back there. Hopefully we'll be back in the office. Some of us are, and but I think we'll get back there eventually. I kind of like Adam, and here's the strange thing. I'm going to admit this. I don't want to do a good job for my organization. I want to do a good job for Adam, because or the people on my team. These are the people I care about. Yeah, we all work for the organization, but the organization is like, they're faceless. These are the people that I want to do a good job for.
Yeah, I love that, right? It's 100% true when I reflect back, to teams that I've been on, right? It's been less about performing for the organization. It's always been about performing for the people on my team, my boss, my, operations leadership, whoever was important in that moment in that project, to accomplish everything. So I think it's a really interesting realization of how people actually think, and approach some of those motivational things. So I want to take a quick moment. I want to pause because I want to thank our sponsor, Ventive. They've been redefining what a CRM does. And, what's really cool about them, and we're talking about teamwork today, is, they have figured out a system that ties your marketing data, your sales data, your operations management data all together, reducing all those gaps, and eliminating data leaks, all that kind of stuff. But more importantly, it just helps your team work more seamlessly together. It improves that communication piece that we're talking about. And so we'll definitely drop their link in the show notes below. If you're catching this on the replay, you can always find their link in our show notes, but definitely go check them out. They have a truly unique product. So we appreciate their support. We've been talking a lot about the individuals on our team. I want to shift gears just a little bit because, though the team is important, I think the leader of the team is really important as well, and plays a big role in this. What are your thoughts on that?
The leader has to well, first of all, yes, the leader is important. Recognizing that the leader, it's not all about that woman or man. It's about the team. I actually have a motto in my organization, and I say, if anybody crosses the finish line in front of someone else, we have failed. We cross the finish line together. And I criticize people. Well, we don't do it anymore. But in the past, I have criticized people for stepping out in front of others. And I've told them they failed because they didn't do it as a team. And it's weird because they say, like, wait, what? I did a good job and you're criticizing me? Like, yeah, you didn't bring others along with you when they actually did participate, and that's what we're going to reward here. So the point is, the leader has to recognize that they want a functioning team, and we wonder, like, well, what's a good team going to do? It seems vague and amorphous. And there's been a lot of research that has shown that people who spend time, or organizations that spend time getting their people to know each other, getting their people to engage, and it's not, loving each other and falling back into each other's arms and climbing ropes and so on. It's just spending a little bit of time getting to know each other, knowing where their heart is. Their employees say they're 12 times more effective than organizations that spend no time on any kind of activity where they're helping their employees get to know each other. And even if it's 10 times more effective, or 8 times more effective, or even 6 times more effective, it's way more effective. And I can tell you from experience that when I first started out as a CEO, I mentioned I was a CEO for 25 years. When I started as a CEO, I didn't know this and I didn't pay attention to it. And our teams stunk and we weren't that effective. And I had a lot of angst, difficulty getting people to work together. We just didn't spend much time on any of this. And in the process of learning over time, the kind of people that you want on your team, doing the research for this book, it was a weird aha moment, in that instead of forcing people to work together, I just set the stage for people to work together, because I can't be the referee in every situation. Staff has to work together on their own. So if I, as the leader, spend time getting people to know each other, well, then when they have to work together without me in the room, then I'm going to trust them that they're going to want to work together and do a good job for each other. So the leader has to, it's not just about buy-in, like, yeah, we'll try it. The leader has to say, this is going to work. Be persistent. We're going to do this regularly. It's not an overnight thing, but over time, over weeks and months of consistent, let's get to know each other a little bit more, share what's going on in our lives. It's going to create a great foundation for a team.
I love that, right? First of all, talking about the numbers, right? Even at a 8 or a 10 times or improvement, like, to think that you could go from 60 or 70% efficient, which I've read in plenty of studies is about the average efficiency of most businesses, to even somewhere around 80 or 90%. You're never going to be 100% efficient, right? But even to get to that 80 to 90% window, it'd be like, I think, just mind boggling on what you could do with your resources and revenue potential for a business. And that's huge, right? The other thing that I think is interesting, right, is that the leader isn't, I love that you say the leader isn't a referee, right? They're just setting the stage, because, so often, you look and you're like, why aren't these people getting along? They're just bickering with each other, right? But if you set this stage of kind of, I call it community, right? And build a community within your team. Not everybody in a community likes each other. Not everybody is best friends, but everybody knows how to work around each other. And I think that's a critical piece. And the leader is the one that sets the culture for that community. And so, I love your call outs on that. Definitely really powerful. I want to switch gears one more time, because I want to move this into, we've erased some of that dysfunction. We've talked about why, what are some of those things that make erasing that dysfunction, your team more efficient, more effective, right? But how do we go from this, we've created a culture and a community within our team that wants to work together and knows each other, to really becoming a high performing team? How do we take that to the next level? What are some things our teams can do to do that?
Well, what's interesting about putting the team together is that, I've mentioned that it happens organically, and I can tell you that in my current position, I've been in California for 5 years, and when I arrived, it was not a good situation. There were a lot of silos in the organization. There was very little trust. I mean, and by little trust, people thought that others were not going to make good decisions. They wondered, when the decision did come along, there was no explanation. People questioned a lot of those decisions, and they didn't like to spend much time with each other. There was just a lot of suspicion, and just so all that sort of morphed into dysfunction, very little teamwork. And I thought to myself, well, like, first of all, I didn't realize I was walking into this hornet's nest. Like, wow. And I'm going to work on teamwork, and people are going to wonder a little bit, like, what's he doing? Why is he asking us to share these things? We'll do a little bit here and there. And over time, it's going to have an impact. And maybe after 6 months, I set a milestone after 6 months, I think we're going to see a change. And then, but I know after a year, there's definitely going to be a change. And after a year and a half, 2 years, people will have completely forgotten about what that's like. And the point there is that you it's hard to describe in uh, you know in with such high assurance, like I'm talking, like, this absolutely works. And I want to describe a few of the kinds of questions that we need to work on, kind of scenarios that can develop. But the people sort of don't believe it. Like, I don't know if we should be bothering to spend the time doing this. But ultimately, what happens is that we we get into these a mindset where we expect to learn a little bit about each other and a little bit more about each other, and then something else it's kind of weird, but I hate to use the word magical, but kind of interesting happens, I guess I'd say, is that, the world doesn't always go perfect for us. We have sicknesses in our families, we have deaths in our families that, whether they're parents, spouses, these kind of things happen. I mean, they happen just simply like around COVID, and then they happen around, things like cancer and so on. And just in my immediate staff, just in the past year and a half, we had several situations like that where we had deaths in the family, and we had spouses that got sick, eventually got better, and I was blown away by our staff reaching out to each other separately. And I mean, they would come up on a Zoom call. How are things going? Well, my wife is not feeling well. She's got cancer. We're getting treatment. And then a staff person who had some experience with treatment says, "Hey, let's talk offline. I'll tell you what's going on, what I went through, and, to see if this, if there's any mental mindset, any stress that I can help relieve on what the path forward looks like." It, they weren't trying to say, "Oh, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine. It's all good." They were saying, "No, let's talk it out." And they did that on their own. And then when those folks got together, there was just so much that it's hard to describe the level of trust, the level of empathy that folks had for each other. It was over the top, and I had nothing to do with it, because it wasn't my family that was sick. It was these other folks that were, and they were the ones with the experience. And I was speechless. I was literally speechless. I mean, I just sort of like let it happen. Like, well, you guys talk it out, uh, you know, let it go for a little bit, because other folks wanted to be supportive on some of our Zoom calls. And then we pivoted and said, well, you guys can, discuss that offline. Nevertheless, the rest of the staff wanted to be supportive of what was going on in that person's family. And it created just a tremendous amount of trust, so that when we got to doing the work, people were eager to volunteer to do the projects that needed to get done, eager to contribute and do it in a way that was positive. Sometimes people are contributing, but they're tearing each other down. We were doing it in a way that was extremely positive. Like, hey, good idea. And let me add this, it wasn't
Mhm.
like, yeah, interesting idea, but that'll never work. It wasn't that at all. It was, yes, and.
Yeah, I love that, right? There's a lot to be said the about how brainstorming happens on teams, right? And I've spent a lot of time in different brainstorming sessions and approaching it different ways in my leadership. And there's always, almost always, notably one or two people that spend their entire session cutting people down because they quote unquote been there, done that, tried that, didn't work, mentality. And so I think it's really interesting that as you build that trust with the team, that some of that starts to go away. I don't think it ever truly always goes away, but I think people realize the humility in being out loud about it a bit. So, um, So I love where we've gone with this conversation. We are getting towards the end of time. So I always like to wrap up the show with a final thought, something that our audience can take away and apply to their business tomorrow. So I leave the stage to you for your final thought.
Well, a final thought and an important giveaway. I think that that listeners will enjoy getting a 2-pager that moves them forward and allows them to implement some of these techniques. So, final thought is that it always works. When you spend time bringing people together, it sometimes feels stupid. And I can tell you, as a CEO, when I used to do icebreakers or was a participant in a meeting where the leader wanted to do an icebreaker and go around, hey, if you had a yacht, what would you call your yacht? Or, what was a favorite food you had as a youngster? And I thought, I'm busy. I got things to do, emails to check, people to meet with. I don't need this lunacy. And what I found was at the next break, I was asking somebody about that dish that their mom made, or that cake that they had, and like, yeah, that's kind of like the same kind of thing that I had growing up too. Tell me more about yours. We just made those connections. So I found that over time they work, and I absolutely guarantee, money back guarantee, you get everything you pay for. They always work when you bring people together to talk about these kinds of activities, what's going on in their lives. They always work. So, if you go to my website, barrymoline.com, and I know you'll put it in the show notes, but barrymoline.com/resources, and you'll see 30 icebreakers. It's actually 30 plus, because it's a few more than 30 icebreakers, or they're workplace icebreakers. And it's very obvious where it is on the website. And it's a 2-pager with a bunch of questions. And the questions are things like a little bit about what we talked about. and I want to give you one that I find to be the absolute best. But nevertheless, there are questions like we talked about. What are you streaming now? Just work related. What are you working on now? What challenges are you facing? Here's an interesting one that you can have some fun with, because you can get some short answers. What were you doing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago? And, people can just bang, 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 list those off. What it does is that is some insight into everybody's journey. Where'd they come from? How'd they get here? But you can do it fast, as opposed to people saying, well, I started out at age 10 and then, like, no. 10, 20, 30 years ago, bam, bam, bam. And it's just fascinating to hear. And then you get that follow-up opportunity later. What was your most unusual job? People say what it is. I castrated bulls on a farm. Like, what? So the point is, you can get some of these things, and amazingly, they help set that table to build a great team. But the one that I find that works the best in every situation, and the reason why it works the best is because sometimes you're at a party and you're talking to somebody, maybe they're, a high school student. And like, what do I talk about with a high school student, or, or a kid in grammar school, or maybe they're retired and I don't know if they're working, like I can't ask, like, what do you do for a living? Or like, do you set an alarm clock? I don't know. What kind of silly thing can I ask this person? You can ask, what's got your attention these days? And everybody's got something going on in their lives, whatever it is. Hey, there's a ball game this afternoon, or I'm babysitting my grandkids. You can always get the conversation going if you just ask, what's got your attention these days? And just fascinating. You get a fast answer. If you want to follow up, you can do that as well. And it always works. But bottom line, as you said, be persistent, take a chance. Get the resource, get this thing from my website, the icebreakers, and start to use them. You can even just check in with somebody, even one-on-one, build some individual relationships, and you'll find that I promise you, you will have better teams before you realize it.
Absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate your perspectives on this. I love how you focus on building people up through communication and trust, and I think that's really really important. Not only in the team dynamic, but as we look at how we navigate business in general. So, really appreciate your time tonight. As always, I want to thank the audience, those of you that joined us live, and those of you that are catching us on the replay. We appreciate you and your time as well. Don't forget to drop on over to thewinningtactics.com. Sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss all the latest episodes dropping. And you can find us on YouTube and all the major podcast networks. And if you drop on over to thewinningtactics.com, we have just launched our new book, our new free ebook. So go ahead and check that out. It is a guide for business leaders. So a little 15-page, great tactical information in there. So check that out and sign up for our email list. So we appreciate everybody's time. We appreciate your time as well, Barry. And we will look forward to seeing all of you next week on the Winning Tactics.
Well, that wraps up yet another episode of the Winning Tactics Podcast. You can find Adam on both the LinkedIn and Facebook platforms. And to support the show and ensure the success of the podcast, would you kindly consider visiting Patreon.com/Adam Sinkus? We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, from the Winning Tactics Podcast, remember, culture is how your team behaves when no one is looking. Take good care, and thanks for listening.